Somebody recently said to me, I am not good at working remotely. And it was such a great statement just out of the blue. We were just having lunch and visiting, and I asked him, I said, well, tell me more about that. That's a really interesting statement to make. And because I've always worked remotely. Not always, but 95% of my career I've worked remotely. And I hadn't really thought about it all that much. And he said, well, a couple things that I know is, number one, I need to be around people. And I have a tough time with isolation. And I said, okay, fair enough. What else? And he said, well, I'm not as motivated. And it's hard to get myself excited to, really dive into a lot of work when I'm working remotely. We had such a great conversation because I think there's a lot of people that, maybe know somewhere in the back of their mind what kind of environment they work best in, but it's really something different to actually say it out loud. And we are still accustomed to kind of traditional, working hours, working situations, how we work or how we communicate. We have operated the same way for a long time. And as we move through different kinds of working environments, different locations, different working hours, working more globally, we have the opportunity to really ask ourselves, what is my ideal working environment and how do I maximize it? And even more important, if I'm in an environment that I know is not perfectly matched to my personality and my ability to work at my top effectiveness, what can I do about it? So I break this down into four main questions and components about how do you know what environment you work best in and what do you do about it. So in this case, if working remotely is not your ideal situation, what can you do and how can you affect it? I think the first step, number one, is to try to identify what your best and ideal working environment is. So that's, there's a lot of questions that go into that. Time of day, do you like to interact with people? Are you task driven in your job or does it require more collaboration? Do you like to sit at a desk? Do you like to sit on the floor? Do you like to be outside? Do you like a standing desk? There's so many different pieces to that, that question. And all of the answers dictate to what environment you'll be in, what kind of space that you should be in, whether or not you're around people. But that first element of just starting to brainstorm and say, what is the best for me? And how do you answer that? Well, I think probably the best way is to know what you don't do well or you don't care for. And then also to reflect, throughout your career, what environment have I worked best in? What way am I managed best? Let's say even you're even a store manager in a retail environment and your regional manager calls you 5 times a day and that's overwhelming to you, or maybe they only call you once a month and you feel like you're left out of the loop a little bit. All these pieces of the puzzle have to do with where we work best and how we work best. And not every work situation will you be able to have the ideal work situation for yourself, but in some cases you can. And the way you communicate this is really important for that, but it all starts with you having awareness of that. So number 2 is understanding and giving yourself a little credit for the fact that if you are not the best person at working remotely, that's okay. There are ways to mitigate this somewhat. Not in every case, but there are some. And it depends on, really understanding that step 1 of what is your ideal environment. I remember actually talking with somebody too who worked remotely. This was several years ago. And they worked remotely in a kind of a sales support job. And they really struggled with kind of the way the day was set. So as we talked through, what his challenges were, I remember asking him, so, what's your ideal day? Or, what's your typical day look like? And he goes, oh, it's all over the place. And, people are calling me all the time. And his role was a sales support customer service. He said, I have no boundaries. People are calling me all night and day. And I said, so is this because they're urgent customer needs? And he said, no, they're just follow-up things. And, none of them are urgent, but everybody feels like everything's urgent. And I remember saying, so you have a task-driven job, but people are giving you different tasks all the time. He said, yeah, but it's basically the same tasks. I complete them over and over again. And so as we talked through, I said, well, what's your best time of day to work? And he said, honestly, I have never been a morning person. I usually, if it's my choice, I get up at 10. I will work until 2 in the morning. I'm happy to do that. But I just have a tough time, but they want me to be, they want me to be 8 to 5 every day. So the more we talked through it, the more I understood that his job was not time dependent, it was task dependent. And after we got through, we actually came up with a plan for him to work according to his best hours, as well as to communicate that effectively with his team and his manager and get approval for it. But it wasn't until he mapped it out, understood it, and can verbalize it that he really made a difference. So this moves me to my third step. So this is still before we actually get to that point that I just said about, this, gentleman who was able to actually change his work environment. And still thinking about, this remote work environment, where you're good, where you're not, what works for you, what doesn't. It's being able to brainstorm what other options you have. So the story that I told in the beginning about a friend of mine saying, I just don't work well remotely. I feel isolated. I feel alone. So we talked through the various ways that he could find a new working environment that felt good for him and that felt right for him. And that actually ended up being some different ways that he utilized his current office space, when people weren't in the building at normal times. And that sense of being isolated is not unique. It's hard to work on your own all the time. And it's hard to feel like you're the only one sometimes talking to yourself. So there are other environments that if you don't have your own office close enough, for instance, if you are physically remote from your actual company headquarters, there are shared office spaces. There are gathering places. There are, Starbucks guys that show up and basically work from Starbucks all day. There's a lot of different ways to organize your days and your time, but doing so requires you understand what you need and then finding sometimes very creative spaces to feel like you can accomplish what you need to accomplish.